Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the April 16, 2025 special Troy City Council meeting. I'll call the meeting to order and ask for the roll call for Ms. Stewart.
Mayor Baker?
Here.
Councilmember Brooks?
Here.
Councilmember Chamberlain-Krianga?
Here.
Councilmember Chanda?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Gunn?
Here.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Here.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Here.
All present this evening. First on the agenda is public comment. I have 2 people signed up for public comment. As a reminder, according to our rules, that there are 3 minutes. 3 minutes is allowed. We'll give you a heads up if it's cutting it close. The public comment will happen in the microphone over here. Please talk into it, even though it's not amplified in the room. You can pick that for the sound for the viewers at home or on YouTube. So first up is David Niven.
Do I move this out a little?
Yeah, you can move it out, thanks.
I feel like I'm up against the wall. Good afternoon. My name is Dave Niffen, 4th generation Troy resident and HOA president of the Gulf Trail subdivision. I wanted to come and express my concern over this potential library bond proposal. Mind you, I'm not anti-library, but rather pro-fiscal responsibility. Much like my role as the HOA president, the council has a fiduciary duty to the taxpayers, which include a duty of care, to exercise diligence over the management of others' money. I worry that the council is asking the taxpayers to fund a new library without exhausting other possible options for the problems at hand. Remember, officials are elected to solve problems, not merely raise and spend money. It's claimed that the library is old and falling apart, yet built in the 70s, it's the same age as the average homes of this city. The very same homes which would bear the tax to build and tear down the library. Where did I go? Yet these 1970s homes are supposed to be, are maintained, and they don't require tear downs. Government facilities are not supposed to be disposable structures. The Detroit Public Library is 150 years old. I'm troubled with the cost of this new build, being floated around the neighborhood of $50 million. It seems big box stores are able to construct very larger facilities that include the purchase of land for much less. I brought some examples. A Costco, 182,000 square foot, $23 million with the acquisition of property. A Walmart Superstore, 164,000 square foot, $12.3 million with the land. A fancy new Meijer, downtown Detroit, $15.6 million with the inclusion of property. Why would our cost be 3, 4, and 5 times higher for a smaller building when we already own the land? If building a new library is absolutely necessary, why hasn't the city explored leasing a building, an existing building? Troy is filled with vacant structures. Many communities have explored this option as it benefits the taxpayers and it cuts down on vacant buildings. I'm told the city here spends $600,000 a year to maintain this library, which is exponentially higher than the maintenance costs for other buildings of this size, age, and scope. For that price tag alone, the city could lease 75,000 square feet for a new library, 50% larger than what we have now. Use the surplus library fund to fund the interior build-out, and then relieve the taxpayers of the liability over the building, the maintenance, the roof, the parking lot, the mowing, plowing, and elevators. I found 2 great options, which I can leave for somebody today, on 16 Mile Road, Big Beaver, 1 mile in each direction. This can solve the library issue, the maintenance issue, and leaves 1 less empty building in Troy. Without raising taxes, this kind of forward thinking the taxpayers can appreciate. What we don't like on Capitol Hill or in our backyard is omnibus spending bills bundling things together. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Jen Peters.
Hi, everybody. Jen Peters, Troy Historic Village. And I sat down and then I realized, which side do I sit on? I don't have super specific comments tonight. I've been following the bond proposal along, and we don't have at the village a particular project. I think there's maybe some resurfacing on the bond proposal, but I'm in support of the bond proposal because I also noticed today on social media, this city is still one of the lowest tax rates in Oakland County. We have high standards. You have excellent facilities here, including a wonderful historic village. And the bond proposal to me is a way for us to continue having quality facilities in the city. It will free up some spending. We have a few projects at the village that keep getting bumped down because we do need to address things like public safety, and we do need new fire engines. And I understand the importance of that, but I have a leaking roof in the church that we've been trying to fix for 3 years, but it keeps getting knocked off of the budget. So one of the things that the bond proposal does is it frees up some additional city resources for some of our other city facilities, which I, for one, would really appreciate. Like I said, I'm looking forward to following along tonight and getting some more details. I'm here to answer questions as well. I'm not officially a person at the table, but I do represent one of our awesome resources here in the city, and I'm happy to be here for that reason. Thanks.
That concludes those that have signed up for public comment. We now move on to the business stated in the special meeting notice. We have one item. D1 is the 2025 bond proposal. I'm going to turn it over to City Manager Nastasi to get things started, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. Appreciate everyone being here. I know we're just here on Monday when we spoke about the city's budget. We started with a larger list of identified capital needs, and based on feedback from Council, the community, and internal discussions, we've narrowed the scope to the focus of the library, roads, public safety, and our parks and rec. The revised plan aligns with our current budget focus, preserving public safety, maintaining our core facilities and infrastructure, and continuing to provide world-class quality of life amenities. James Vitrano has been part of the process from the beginning, starting with the Capital Conference, and he'll walk us through how the proposal has progressed and where we're at today. And with that, I turn it over to you, James.
Thanks, Frank. I'm going to stand up just because it feels weird to present while sitting. Thank you. My goal this evening is to for the public and for those watching on YouTube, and of course as a reminder to City Council of where we started with an evaluation of the capital needs. My role in this was to facilitate a prioritization of those capital needs, and that was accomplished in January. Since then, staff has done considerable work, as the city manager said, to kind of refine those priorities down to the point of this evening where staff is ready to present to the city council the list that they would recommend if there's going to be a proposal placed on the November ballot, that the included activities be what is on the final slides when we get there. So prior, the capital budget for the city has identified several needs. A total of $51.8 million was identified just in the capital budget by staff that is required between this Cummings budget through 2030. That is what really several months ago, actually in late 2024, started the conversation on how can those needs be better funded, and as mentioned at the podium this evening, even freeing up funds in that capital plan fund by getting other external resources. In this case, it would be a bond. We facilitated a meeting on January 11th. The goal was to review the capital needs presented by staff and let City Council evaluate those needs and prioritize. So for several weeks in advance of the Capital Conference, I met with staff and they had brought needs that they had on the Capitol. We had created a long list of what those needs are, and over those weeks, staff developed just pricing for those. Many of the projects were already in the plan, so the pricing was available, but also short narratives, so City Council could be aware of what each of those projects were. It was really important for us to establish that in advance and provide it to the elected officials in advance, so that when we came to the Capitol Conference, the activity of prioritization could be front and center. And these are the projects. I'm going to run through them quick. They're available on the city's website. They're available on the report from that Capitol Conference that staff identified as needs. This is in alphabetical order, and this is how we started the Capitol Conference, was that staff brought this to the policymakers and said, these are the identified large capital needs that we have in our community. And as you can see, there's a couple repeats, some that say marginal expenses. Where possible, staff broke these into, if not phases, maintenance and full replacement options, so that the elected officials could then use that to prioritize where they would like to place those projects, including if they want to break them up into two potential different projects. The total that was presented there in January was $199.98 million in capital needs for the projects identified by staff. And it's important to recognize that this isn't every project that the staff would have had in advance of the capital project in all of their departments. These were ones that they identified as highest priorities to bring to the elected officials on that day and ask for their guidance, a policy guidance on what is priority. During the Capital Conference, the policymakers developed that prioritization. I'll return to this list in a second and another slide, but this is the prioritization that was had. We used some prioritization techniques along with some narrative conversations that everyone had. Staff was there to answer questions that council members may have had throughout, as well as some small group discussions so that we could get as much detail or answer as many detailed questions as possible for the policymakers as they decided what is more important, that ranking that we ultimately left with. It's important to know that the policymakers did three things. They considered the need as presented by the staff, they considered the cost as presented by the staff, but then they also considered the impact to the taxpayer. So as part of our capital conference, as part of this prioritization function, staff had prepared and the city council could observe what the cumulative cost, what the impact to the millage of the city is, and then the estimated annual tax burden to the taxpayer for the average taxable value in the city of Troy for a residential property. So all three of those were front and center for the policymakers as they were making their prioritization decisions, pushing projects up, pushing projects down, deciding where a line might be of interest based on need, cost, as well as impact to the taxpayer. At the end of that day, and it was a Saturday, and we were there for several hours, it became quite obvious that there were really groupings of 5 projects that were of most interest to the policymakers, as well as interest to the staff who had them on the list. But after the prioritization exercise, the library, public safety, streets, City Hall, and Parks and Rec became the obvious projects that were kind of, if you were going to set a line of what can we both address as far as our needs, as well as be responsible to the impact of the taxpayer. Those 5 projects, really when we left that meeting, staff had direction to say, research this, do your due diligence on these projects, engage in conversations with the community, and engage in further researching each of those projects. For each of those 5, progress is being made on a library design. That was kicked off prior to even the Capital Conference to try and refine what a new library could look like. A specific Planning Commission City Council meeting is planned for April 28th. You'll see more information on the plan, as well as in May, a cost estimate based on the plan that the architects are working on. That due diligence is ongoing, specifically by external professionals. Internally, core roads and Paiser ratings were reviewed for those street projects. The public safety individuals, professionals in the city looked at their needs and began to refine what priorities they would have on that list of the dollar amount, what would be most important. Consideration of options for City Hall, what is needed, what could be maintained versus replaced, was also continued to be discussed by staff. That's been discussed by staff. I've worked with Troy for several years. Each year, the City Hall needs are brought forward and different options are explored and different put-offs or inclusions to the operational budget have been addressed. That continued since the Capital Conference. And finally, a detailed review of park needs, and that was presented to at a public meeting on February 24th of several very specific parks projects that could be included in a bond proposal. If you'd like information, we aren't going to get into detail on each park project, but that February 24th meeting packet would provide you with information on those parks projects, several of the parks projects that would be included. Since January 11th, there's also been significant community engagement, formal council meetings, as I just mentioned. There was a couple prior, very specific to the projects in the park. You had your budget meeting. There'll be public meetings as it refers to the library in the next couple of weeks. Troy talks with the city manager and engaging with the community to get opinion with the information coming out of that capital conference of these were the priorities, these were the costs. None of that was decided on that day. On that day was a prioritization day. No action was taken with the clear intent to get the public's input on these ideas. That happened at Troy Talks, Rotary Club presentation, social media feedback, which the city's been monitoring, as well as frequent and informal conversations had by staff and city council members with the public. And that's not something just to be added on as that last bullet. I think that's probably of these the most important piece. Council members have been talking with their constituencies, staff members have been hearing from the public, and culminating together in their internal communication has brought forth what we're now presenting this evening. The themes in all of these communications, these aren't absolute, these are themes. Library, roads, public safety, and parks had general support. Improvements to City Hall had less support and more begging for are there other options for any improvements to City Hall, with a clear desire to keep taxpayer impact as low as possible. That was the feedback summary that I presented. These are my words based on listening to the city council members and the staff on what they heard. Bringing that together to this evening, staff has prepared a number of projects, some in quite amount of detail and some in less detail, to continue to get refined as you approach an August and then a November date. It's $112 million, and I've got the numbers here of 50 for the library, 35 million streets, 17 parks, and 10 public safety. I've got a slide for each in a second. But that is what, based on that prioritization factor, well, first, the needs that was described by the staff, the prioritization by the city council, the due diligence that was done after the January 11th meeting, that brings us to this list that the city has asked that I present this evening that came out of the capital conference in January with those filtering points that I just mentioned. The first is the library, and that's a $50 million. That's the largest part of the 112. Some facts, and again, the April 28th meeting will be much more important for those that are more interested in information on the library, but it did open in '72 and is considered functionally obsolete. Currently, it's got 0.6 square feet per resident, which the standard or the national average for libraries is 0.9 to 1.2 square foot per resident. So it's not only an older, obsolete building, it also is small for a community of your size, which has grown significantly since 1972. The cost estimate, it's important to note that the cost estimate was established by staff based on research and construction estimates. That number, it's accurate with the professionals that reviewed it, but it's really important to remember that our architectural design and cost opinion will be presented at the end of May. So this number that's in there is accurate to the best of the staff's knowledge to today, but there will be further clarity on that number as you get closer to that architectural design and opinion at the end of May. $10 million for public safety, specifically fire apparatus and police sworn body cameras and public safety technology upgrades have been identified for that funding. $35 million for streets. Two large projects that need this type of capital infusion have been identified. Coolidge Square Lake to 14.5 Mile and Waddles Adams to DeQuinder. The significance of those projects and the amount of mileage, both lane mileage, the width, as well as the length of those areas will consume about, that's 30 million of the 35 million, with the last 5 million being allocated for various local roads based on what is called PASER rating. It's a rating that the city does of each street in the community to determine its condition and the appropriateness to invest, usually to prolong the life of that road as opposed to replace it in full. The Parks and Rec opportunities are at 17 million. The largest chunk is general park improvements that have been pre-identified or identified throughout the park system, with some specific funding being allocated to Troy Farm, specific for trails and pathways, the community center, and then pickleball courts as those these smaller projects being already pre-identified. Many of the smaller projects that are in the park improvements are just that, smaller projects that already are known by the Parks Department as being on their needs list from that original capital plan. So, next steps. So from this evening on April 16th, that's the next click down in this filter, and each time you take a click down as you get closer and closer to November, the city has other actions it can take. April 28th, I mentioned that a couple times, there's a Joint Planning Commission City Council meeting to review the library project. On May 30th, there's a meeting scheduled to receive the cost estimate from the architecture and the schematic design for the library. That's an important date in terms of refining that final number that on June 9th, staff hopes to present to City Council a resolution asking them to take an action instructing staff to prepare a resolution that would set a bond for ballot in November. That would be at the June 9th meeting. Hopefully staff receives that direction. Either City's Council is going to say, please prepare that resolution, or they certainly can say, please don't prepare that resolution, and we're going to continue to explore other options. If they're directed to prepare it at the June 30th meeting, staff will prepare that resolution for a bond for November 2025, that election. It's important that this timeline be really clear, both to the staff members, to the elected officials, as well as to the public. As you get close to that June 30th, or as you get past that June 30th, there are certain dates and there's certain preparation that you need to do as a city to be prepared for a bond proposal November 2025. One of the most important things is to prepare educational materials for the community. The city will not be preparing pro-bond or anti-bond material. The city has an obligation to prepare educational material about the ballot question and about the ballot questions that's asking to fund the bonds. Individuals, and certainly it's elected officials as individuals, members of the community can advocate for or against a ballot proposal, but the city has to be prepared for an engaging community education process, not only meeting the dates required by the state to have ballot language on the ballot, but that June 30th date becomes important just to be able to prepare that further communication, as well as hit the state deadlines for ballot language. And that concludes what I wanted to present this evening in terms of a summary of where you've been to where staff is at this evening. I'm at the end of one of these presentations, you always say I'm happy to answer questions. I'm probably not the one to answer questions if you may have them. I'm the one to present facilitated information of where you are at this point. But I look forward to your conversation.
Thank you, James. Appreciate that. And I appreciate you being here, number one, and city management for having you come here, because you have been integral to this process and bringing us along. I think this was a really great summary of where we've been and where we need to go in whatever direction we take. I think the hard part comes now for council a little bit, and I don't know if there's questions you want to start with, questions for staff, questions. Like James said, I don't know what James could necessarily answer, but if questions for anybody. So let's start with some questions, and then maybe we can kind of dive into some specifics otherwise. Go ahead.
We got a couple for the library. First of all, so let's say the library proposal comes back much more than the 43 million that we projected. Does the bond go up? Do we take something away from additional projected items in the bond? You know, what happens with that? But the other thing is, I have heard, okay, this library cannot be fixed, right? But I've seen enough buildings myself, inspected, overseen projects that are much older. And when they talked about this library needs to be rebuilt, I've never seen a study given to me that says, okay, we can't, because I've seen tear downs, but people are not operating in these tear-down type buildings. There's impossible to operate. They're condemned. Yet we've declared this to be somewhat, it's got to be condemned, it has to be torn down. What would it cost be to renovate? I mean, I saw Sterling Heights did a add-on renovation that was substantially less. And third, I've never heard any study about what are we going to do with this library if we did move. So those are my three questions.
All right, let's start with number one. Frank, who will answer? Or you wrote them down. Go ahead. I don't need to restate them, right?
No. As far as the bond, the money right now, we have kind of earmarked for that, was when we originally got numbers, it was $550 a square foot. Everything changes, almost changes daily in this world. But that's where we came up with that. The study had said for our size, roughly I think it was 82,300 square feet to 90,000. So if I take that 90,000 mark and times it out, we're just under that 50 million mark. So that's kind of where we're at with that. If things come in more or less, we'll make adjustments. Anytime you do a large construction project like that, there's different things that can be taken away or added to adjust the price. So there's a lot of different movement on that. Cost to renovate, I think I'd like to turn that over to Kurt.
Sure. Good evening, Mayor and Council.
Phone a friend.
Yeah, so when we looked at the library, the library bones is not our concern. The library itself is to function as a modern-day library is more the concern. Going in and renovating the interior of the building, keeping the structure the same, I think is what becomes difficult. We're not suggesting that the library is falling down or needs to be condemned, but to operate as a modern-day library to some of our neighbors, that's where the constraints are, is the building's footprint and the building's layout. Having two separate wings, having the addition, having limited opportunity to develop space for staff for back-of-house operations compared to what you want to have the public-facing space. So I think that's really becomes the challenge. Could we add square footage to the building? Absolutely. We could put another wing on. I'm not the library professional, so I will lean on Emily and Philip and the consultants they use to say that, yes, you can add square footage, but you can't add it in a way to make it into a functioning modern-day library.
Have you ever sat down with a consultant and said, this is what it has to be, and see what that would look like? Like, in other words, we have a consultant advising us on the new build. Have we ever sat down with somebody and said, this is what we need, and they said, impossible, we can't do it?
Yeah. So we've used consultants in the recent future to renovate some of the youth services and add additional space. And it's not that it's impossible, it becomes the return on that investment because of how much, as an example, adding restrooms to a back-of-house area, you have to tear floors to get all your infrastructure into that area. It doesn't become cost-effective to do those types of renovations in a building that style. If it had, open floors, if it had basements underneath the entire library, it would be a different story. We could do those types of infrastructure adjustments a lot easier, but its current design doesn't allow for that. But to answer your question fully, architects have looked at that library to do renovations. They have proposed renovations to the library. We've actually bid those out, and it was too expensive.
Can I clarify? I know that initially we talked about it was 40+ million for a new library, but it was 20+ million to renovate the existing based on that outside consultant, wasn't it?
Yeah, at least 20 million. I mean, I guess the question comes, if you're gonna do it, are you gonna do it right? And the one thing we talked about was we're vastly undersized. So if you wanna get up to that square footage, that's gonna talk about expanding out the footprint. There's no way around it. The renovations we've explored haven't expanded the footprint at all. So if you wanted to get it up to 90,000 square feet, I don't believe, I'm not the expert, but I don't believe we have even the land there. And an expert did look at it, and I think it was 2008, and you can't add on another floor to the library. So that has been explored, and we have explored renovations, so.
And what about the existing building? What was the plans for that?
So in the capital conference, we talked about repurposing, if we were successful, including City Hall. Whether City Hall is included in the bond proposal or not, we're going to have to address the needs of City Hall. And in the capital conference, we talked about using, if we were successful in getting a new library and operations were to move out of that building, we could move a lot of the function over City Hall temporarily over to the library so we could efficiently renovate this building and address some of the infrastructure issues here. We also talked about, possibly the clerk's office. The clerk has a need for more and more space every year with early elections, and they're consuming a lot of space over at the community center right now and taking away that banquet space and that opportunity for the community center. So that's another idea that we're floating around, that could the clerk's department move over to that building and give them all the space they need to be successful. So again, I don't think raising the building has ever been discussed, because the building itself, it's functionally obsolete as a modern day library. The building itself is not falling down.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Chamberlain Craig, I saw you also had questions.
Yes. With the 112 million total amount, and I know I asked this in the budget session about tariffs, and just wondering, and I know it's too soon, and that was also the feedback when it came to the budget. It was created well before this period. I say this because I had a conversation, I've shared this with a couple of council members, they were there, had a chance to meet with a bond lawyer at MML, at CapCon, Michael McGee, he was at Miller Canfield, and his advice around the tariffs was that, and this is it's a question for a CFO, is you need to work with your external financial planner and just do different modeling and figure out some different numbers. So I just wonder, how are we thinking about that, and how nimble can we be? I don't want to go much above what I'm, this figure and what we're talking about. But I'm also nervous, this is what makes a bond kind of nerve-wracking for me, is you're telling residents you're going to do X, Y, and Z with this amount of money, and then if suddenly things become much more expensive in building materials, it just puts us in a difficult position. So just wondering, could someone put me at ease on this in some way? How are we expecting to approach it?
Anytime we do projects, we do factor in extra costs. A lot of times you don't have to come back to council, say, we shortchanged it, we need more money. So that's one thing, but I wish I had a crystal ball, how things will stay the same or improve or get worse. But I know the one thing that we would do for 100% is be transparent with our residents. Stating if there is $17 million worth of projects, and that $17 million for rec doesn't go as far, we would prioritize, and let's say we do $15 million, and the other project we could possibly use fund balance or something else, or way to push it down the line. But what we would be doing is being totally transparent with the residents, so they know why we're doing it, and even before we do it, so we're all on the same page and get community feedback, because we're all in this together.
Can you speak on that note, I don't know if it's you or the CFO, the rigidity and the flexibility of bond language and how that plays out? Because my understanding is our bond language would be limited. We wouldn't say in the bond language 17 million on Parks and Rec, I don't think, or would we? And how do you deal with, the bond market changes daily and interest rate. How would that play out? I think that's also kind of part of that whole, it's not specific to tariffs, but it's the economy as a whole.
Yeah.
And hopefully we can answer all your questions tonight. If not, but we'll get back with you, because you guys have some really great questions. But with that, hopefully, Rob, would you like to tackle that one?
Yeah, I will. Lori, do you want to first talk about the bond language though?
Well, yeah, the bond language, you are correct in that it would, the way I foresee it, and again, council will have to approve the language as it's proposed. The bond language does need to identify what it's being used for, but it does not necessarily require you to detail how much is being used for each of this. So there is some flexibility with the bond language under the state statute. So that's what I would propose, that we have some flexible language there to accommodate, the changes in what the projects are actually going to cost in the future.
So just to clarify on that, sorry, does that mean language would say likely, will you consider this bond for this and this amount for a library, Parks and Rec, public safety, and roads? Those kind of generalizations for flexibility?
Right.
And if it ends up being 14 million for Parks and Rec and something else million for, that's what would allow for that?
Right. There is flexibility as long as you're identifying what the money is being spent for, and again, that transparency is a key component of that language.
Question along that line. So I know that these are kind of general categories. We don't have to be like really specific, like say, oh, we're buying fire trucks, the X number of fire trucks. It just has to be kind of more general language, or?
Again, we're not there yet, so this is a bit premature, but the language that we would propose and the language that we've had in the past, again, it's identifying the areas where you're going to be spending it, but not getting into the great detail, because we're also limited in the amount of words that we can use as well.
The bonds from 25 years ago, I think one of them said to buy land for parks, right? It didn't specify on John R.
Right.
or rent. Is that?
Correct.
Okay, good. That
There's
helps.
less
That does help them.
Sorry.
So the other part of that is what Frank had mentioned earlier is, so using the library as an example, okay, we've talked about 50 million. I wouldn't get fixated on that 50 million because there's a long way to go before we get the cost of what the bids are going to come out at. What we would do though is we have contingencies such as some fund balance. We have operations that can be cut to build a fund balance if there are any types of overruns. So there's always those flexibilities. As it relates to the bond, like we talked about 2 days ago, we don't know what the interest rates are going to be. What I've asked our consultant to do on the finance side is to run me, because I've heard different things. I've heard 112 million was one number. I've also heard trying to keep it under $1 million. So I've had them run me different scenarios for those two facets. So at a 4% interest rate today with our taxable value, we could get up to 124 million. Now, I'm not suggesting that you want to go up there, but if there's a concern of tariffs, if there's a concern of some overruns, maybe an idea is to keep it under $1 million, but go for the most that you can in that case to mitigate some potential overruns if that's a concern.
Yeah, one of the things I want to touch upon, I understand in bond language, there's only so much room. We've all done those before and just got a little small paragraph. But that educational component is so important that we're going to be transparent with the residents. And if anything changes on that, anytime during that process, we'll explain that so all the residents know. So, thank you.
I have a follow-up to Rob's
Yeah.
question, thank you. And maybe it's not the right time, but when you said the 124 million, was that what, 1 mil guess? Based on our
under
tax
1 mil.
value now and the interest rates today? Okay. Just wanted to clarify that's what you. Councilmember Hamilton.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Are you finished? For now,
I'm
Rebecca?
fine.
Okay,
I mean, I
for
have
now.
a question, but you'll
Yeah,
probably
sorry.
get to it.
So the June 30th date, I was a little surprised by that. I mean, I'm guessing that gives us a little wiggle room. I thought we really didn't need to wait, didn't need it till like end of July. And I could see us having like a month wiggle room, but I know with community engagement, every day is really important. So that makes it really tight. So I'm wondering, is there flexibility with that? Does it have to be the June 30th meeting, or could it be 1 or 2 meetings later? Maybe, say, Attorney Bloom could. I know when it comes to charter amendments, you need a little more time. It has to go to the governor and stuff, but with bond proposals, could we wait till a July meeting to, vote on the final language, or is June 30th kind of like where we finally know where we want to do and we begin drafting the language? I guess and I hear we say June 9th, there's not a lot of time for that.
Again, there is some flexibility. Obviously, the sooner that you have this prepared, the easier it is to get the information out to the public in that educational component and to have the language approved. So yes, there is some flexibility beyond June 30th.
What is the drop dead date that we have to approve it by?
I believe it's August, but I can't, I didn't look.
Because I see two sides. It's like there's community engagement now to decide what we want to ask for, and then there's what we want to decide. There's community engagement to spread that to give that information of what we actually decide to the voters as well. And both sides are important. So I kind of want a little more time, but we'll see there. I know when it came to the projects, like library, roads, public safety are pretty straightforward. With parks, I think there's a lot of flexibility in the proposed projects. Now, if the ballot language is kind of general, then I guess if it's approved, we can kind of look at our Parks and Rec master plan. I know an update to that's coming up soon, I think, too, a 5-year update, to kind of decide formally what projects we want to do. I know we're not married, like I see 3.2 million for Troy Farm. I don't know all the details of that project and other things, so whoever can speak on that, how will we talk about the Parks and Rec piece of that to residents, and if it's approved, where do we go from there? How flexible is that? I guess whoever can answer that.
Yeah, the key from what you're saying is that educational component. I agree, but I would like to ask Kurt to go into a little bit more detail.
Sure. So when we looked at paring the park projects down to what was presented on the 24th, what we did is we really separated the two. We separated what the planned expenditures were out, so what we know what we're going to need in the next 5 years. So we know that we're going to need some play structure equipment. We know that we're going to need some pavilion. We know that there's other park infrastructure that is going to need to be addressed. And then we looked at, what could we also include in there that is something new. And so, we have several vacant parcels, parkland that have gone untouched for the last over 20 years. So the farm, just looking at the farm, you've got $2 million into improvements that were not planned expenditures. We talked about the addition of the senior gardens. Now that's something that our residents want. We talked about, having a paved parking lot, something our residents want, having restrooms at the farm, all that, doing a play structure, really making it more of a community space. Those were not planned expenditures. What the farm is the retaining wall along Beach Road. That is a planned expenditure. We know that wall is going to have to be replaced in the next 5 years. It's moving out. So we really looked at dividing it up. The majority of the proposed projects in the Parks and Recreation, replacing the locker rooms at the community center, are all planned expenditures. At some point, whether bond or not, if it's not bond, then they compete, right? They compete with the other projects, they compete with the other infrastructure and higher priority emergency services type projects. Hopefully that answers your question.
And when is the update to the Parks and Rec master plan coming? Because it probably should wait till till this bond process is complete, because I think that will kind of speak to what we can do in the next 5 years.
So we're assigning that to the consultant now.
Okay.
And so that'll take, we'll probably start a little bit of public engagement. We don't want to confuse, if council did want to move forward with the bond proposal, we don't want to engage the public in too many different directions, right? And it's very important that we engage the public on the Parks and Recreation plan. So we don't want to give any false hope that, this is what this part of the bond either. So definitely assigning to the consultant this summer. There's a lot of work that goes into that plan that's outside of public engagement. So we'll be navigating through that, especially when Courtney gets back and how she sees that all fitting together. But again, I just want to reiterate, 90% of what's being proposed in the Parks and Recreation is planned expenditures. Okay. We're probably not going to get much feedback from the community saying, yes, you need to redo the gym floors, or yes, we need to do lockers at the community center. Right. So those types of things, we would want to get the feedback, what kind of improvements do you want at the farm, or maybe it's another location, but 90% of those projects are all planned expenditures.
Okay. Thank you.
And again, just with the flexibility of the bond language, the process of spending those bond dollars from Parks and Rec is still going to come before council with projects and contracts as usual, right? Yes. So we're not locking ourselves into that. And this list was put together, my understanding, with, again, you just talked about the planned expenditures, but the understanding that you're coming to us with, these are the things we need, like James talked about, or this is what's on staff's radar that we needed us to understand that's out there. And again, I'm double speaking, but that's it. It's not that we're guaranteeing $3.2 million spent on Troy Farm at the end of this process, right?
That's correct. That's correct, yes.
You got another one for now?
Yeah, for Rob, when we do the ballot language, when do you have to kind of lock in, because interest rates are changing every day. They're changing every week. It's 4.3%. It was 4.1 a couple weeks ago. When do you have to lock in that amount? Is it in July when we do the language, legally, or
the dollar amount?
Yeah, the estimated millage cost. We'll lock in the dollar amount, but in the ballot language, you estimate what the millage cost is. So, and obviously you're gonna use the prevailing interest rates at the time and what our estimated taxable value will be next year. When do you have to, like legally, do you have to use the interest rate that is the day that you draft that? Do you use an average over the last few months? Like, cause that can really, I mean, that can change it quite a bit.
I don't have that answer.
Okay. I know, that's
have that answer, but what I would say to you is, in the school district, any other city that does do these bonds has the same issue, right? So you're going to have to tell us a certain dollar amount, and then that's what. And if the residents agree with it, that's what we're going to live with. And the millage rates, I mean, if they are favorable, then we're going to be more aggressive of starting the project sooner. If they're high rate as we enter, we're going to maybe slow down when we're going to do that first bond. So there's some timing there.
No, I get that. I'm just saying for the language that voters are going to be approving, I think the millage rate is really important. And to me, it's really important to keep it under 1 mil. I mean, that to me is critical, considering economic uncertainty, considering where we're at in the city. So, whatever these numbers are, I don't know where the interest rates are going. I don't know what interest rate we legally need to use to do that estimate, but whatever it is, I'd like to keep it under the 1 mil.
Councilmember Chanda?
Yeah, that's kind of my question too. Looking at the timeline, it looks like June 9th is really when we make a decision about, June 30th is when we are actually approving the language, right? So the city management needs some time to come up with the ballot language. Let's say that's the day we make as our deadline. So the millage that we're talking about below 1, or let's say at 1, that needs to be done by June 9th. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, there's some flexibility, like Lori said, but there are definite timelines that we have to meet. We're on a very quick time frame here to, it was requested of city management to get it for the 2025. So yeah, it's moving quickly, and that's why here we want to hone down on, more exact numbers, because we've been holding off on a lot of the information going out because there's too many unknowns. So that's just part of the larger process, and we can get back with maybe more flexibility on dates after we figure out, because we don't want to miss any of the timelines. So there's some cushion built in, because we all know life happens and we don't want to miss the opportunity. So.
And another clarification question on the library. I heard that number $20 million for renovation. Does that include expansion, or is that just renovating the current building, right?
Just renovate.
And I irresponsibly threw that number out. I think that was a number. I'm the one that sounds one of those. But I remember there was something that was it was more than 20
years
million.
ago, yeah.
And then,
I think 20 to 30 million, I would expect
and then
higher now.
on top of that, if you add another wing, say another 30,000 square feet, I think we're looking at probably even exceeding our new building. So that's one thing we need to explain to residents, that renovation probably even not a fiscally responsible thing to do, other than the fact this building, as you mentioned, it's not even built for a library, right? But even if you forget that, even just from a pure dollar amount, it may not be the right thing to do. So that's something I wanted to mention, that if you're spending $40 million just to renovate and expand, might as well go with a brand new building for $50 million. So.
Just like, I want to give residents the opportunity. Do you want the best library in Oakland County?
Right.
Like, as the mayor said in his State of the City last year, we have A+ library staff and service with like an F building. Do we want to give our residents a chance to vote and say, I want an A+ building? And if they say no, that's okay. We'll take that feedback and we'll try some of the other ideas that people have. But I want to give the residents a chance to have the best of the best library in Oakland County.
Absolutely.
That's what I want to see. It's their choice, but I want to give them that chance.
Any questions, Councilor Aurora?
I just wanted to point out, James did a background back to the Capitol Conference. But the truth is, this council and some council members that preceded some of the newer folks, we've been talking about this, being creative about this, kicking around what can we do for years. And last budget, last April, we talked about this would be the year of capital. And the year before that, we knew we were going to be talking about we needed a year of capital. This may sound like a new conversation to people, but those of us like in the day-to-day work, and certainly the ones on staff that are working this 24/7, the push me, pull you of our budget and our capital needs, it has been ongoing and getting more and more strained. We were talking about how do we meet capital needs before it became apparent truly how functionally obsolete the library building was. So first was capital discussions about, we were having huge pressures about parks, we were having pressures about roads. We've been hearing about Sterling Heights is doing this, Rochester is doing that. Why isn't Troy? Well, because they're passing millages to accomplish those things. Royal Oak has done this. And all along, we've been as fiscally responsible as we can be. And frankly, kicking the can down the road, the school district was going for a bond, we took a step back. We dealt with COVID. We're having these conversations. There is a sense of urgency in my mind as a homeowner and a taxpayer that, and maybe I'm being overly alarmist, and Rob, feel free to rein me in, because I don't mean to be hyperbolic. You know, we've spent years being creative. We looked at private-public partnerships for the Civic Center property. There's been a lot of creative thinking that goes on. Architects that have volunteered time. This has been going on for years. And I truly feel like we're at an inflection point. And every time we kick the can down the road again, it's costing us more. And frankly, if I was a resident out there watching us, I'd be peeved that we haven't done this before now. We should have been doing this probably 3, 4, 5 years ago. And I say that as a retiree, living on money I've saved. I'm a taxpayer. We make $170 a month doing this role. We are your fellow residents who have a front row seat. Now, Rob, or Frank, these are the conversations we've had over time. Is this still the case? Am I off base with my sense of urgency that I feel about this?
No, you're absolutely right. It was key, we're always competing with other projects. For example, the police roof, it finally gave where it's leaking onto our important electronics in our dispatch center. And that's, over the years, we kept putting it off to the side because other items took precedence. Well, that one takes precedence now because it's actually leaking and you know, we need to be able to function with all the electronics that are in there. So that's one of those things that, in myself being with the city as long as I have, it's year after year after year. And a lot of the people don't see all the projects that were left out because we have to sit there and like run it through and siphon it down to, yes, this is how much money we have, and these are the most important, we have to do projects. And we do that, and I think my staff does a wonderful job. Council, we bring everything to you, and it gets vetted, and we get the best deals, and we're very good stewards of the money, but that only goes so far.
And Ms. Hoover, I was just going to say that since our capital conference, 2 other cities have joined in. You mentioned Rochester Hills, you mentioned Sterling Heights. Livonia and Novi are proposing to do the same thing we're doing at much bigger dollars and at much more higher millage rates. So I appreciate everyone's concern about keeping it under a certain amount or keeping it, whether it's millage or dollars. But if you're looking at communities that we strive to consider our peers, Sterling, Novi, Rochester Hills, you can argue we might be falling one more step behind. And I think that's what you're saying.
Right. Yeah, if I can just say for a second, I plan to stay here. I want this place to be a place I can age in. I want it to be a place that families move to. I want it to be competitive and complementary to the cities around us. I don't want to be redundant with what the other cities deliver, and I think we've been very smart. Then just one other question, because this is the era of talking about being lean and cuts, and are we overstaffed and all the fat that we have in the city hall staff. Last I checked, we hadn't ever added back the third of the staff we cut during the recession, except for here and there, onesie-twosies, very, very lean. I feel like, there was a very extensive libertarian-type movement in the city of Troy that came in and really created a fiscally lean and responsible and low staff situation. That hasn't, when I've been looking maybe the other way or when I'm not realizing, that hasn't changed. We're still lean and mean, correct? When I'm looking at in the budget, the head counts, when I hear what folks are doing, residents that are now tracking with us, we ask those questions. We've been there and done that on cutting the heck out of the staff to the extent that we had to, we've even privatized things. We shipped off the historic village and the nature center. They're now their own nonprofits.
Cut a quarter of the police force.
We
defunded the police 12 years ago.
We did.
We did. I'm sorry. We did.
We did.
I'll be very clear. We did not.
I was an activist. I was an activist at the time arguing you're cutting this and making it too lean. That hasn't changed, right? I mean, we're a lean, mean municipal machine.
Yes, we're very transparent. Our entire budget is out there for everybody to see. This whole mantra about doing more with less, we've been living that, our staff, but we're also competing with other cities in the private industry, and you got to be careful. You could keep loading up a worker with more and more, because I'm huge on customer service for all residents. And when you're short-staffed, there's people pulling double, triple duties trying to get the work done, and we're so big on hiring and retention, it's hard to retain people if they know they can, go across the street or down the road and not have as much stress. So it's a balancing act. It's difficult for me and my staff. We want to make sure we have a great work environment. If you've gone on any of the library tours, and even some of the offices here in the city, you got people crammed in. I did the tour of the library right after I became city manager, and I was astonished. People are pretty much elbow to elbow trying to work, and it's difficult. So I really appreciate everything you do over there, Emily, and keeping morale up.
Councilmember Hamilton.
Yeah, to add to what we were talking about, Councilmember Hoderick, what we do is, a lot of times I hear from residents that all this new construction and the taxable value we gain from that, where does that go? Well, one, I think if you kind of add it per capita and everything, it's maybe increased the taxable value by 5 to 10% maybe. But all of that we have put into our operating millage and taken it out of our capital millage. And we've done that to help restore like a police force, like Councilmember Hoderick said. Back in 2018, we restored the traffic safety unit, and in the last couple of years, we've hired a lot more officers, and maybe you can correct me, but I think we've kind of restored maybe half the cuts that we had to do in the Great Recession. I think we reduced the police force sworn officers by 25%. Not we, like the old council that did it at the time. And so we've used basically all that extra revenue to rebuild. I mean, the police is the main expense we put in our general fund. It's like half our general fund and fire, and we've used it to try to restore that, right? Correct. And capital has been what has taken the brunt of that.
Yes.
And so we just don't have the funds to do what our residents want. And I think the residents of Troy deserve the best of the best with the library, with our roads, with our parks, and with our public safety. So I like the focus here, and I want to give the residents a chance to evaluate it and make the decision themselves.
I didn't see a question there, but I agree with you 100%.
Sorry.
Well, I guess the one question I would have is, as Mr. Nippen had proposed, what about, renovating one of our empty buildings in Troy? Is that something that would be a possibility?
Kirk, you want this one? Sure.
anything's possible, right? I mean, but we've heard loud and clear that the Civic Center campus for years should be maintained for civic use. We've created, and we continue to build upon that, this one-stop shop for, we're adding more recreation. We added a pavilion, the library. If you take the library off-site, one is we have to consider, is the cost impacts. There's ADA standards, and then there's what we should do as a government to go above and beyond to make sure we're accommodating everyone with different abilities. So taking a building that might not be built to what we would call our standards of accessibility, there would be a cost to that, and looking at, is it convenient to the public as well? We're very centrally located here. Could we pick a building up on Big Beaver and renovate it into a library? Probably. It's doable. Would it be the library that Emily or Philip really envision, or the people, how many customers go to the library? I don't know. Probably not. I would assume they would want to keep it. And one of the reasons why we focused on the location for the new library is here on the Civic Center campus. So again, it's doable. I don't think that's what the people that use the library now would really look forward to.
Thank you. And I guess I would just echo a lot of what Councilmember Hoderick said. We are being fiscally responsible with this proposal. We know that all of these things, no matter what, even if we know that we're going to have to put money into a library regardless. These are all things that we know we're going to have to do at some point. So the longer we wait, I do not anticipate that the costs are going to go down. So, and I agree, we should have done this before, years ago, honestly. I've been on council since 2019, and this has been a concern year over year. First I remember going into an advance, this was a couple years ago, and all we talked about was City Hall. And I had no idea that City Hall was in such bad shape until I sat through that advance and really heard from all of the staff the conditions that they were trying to work in. And so, we do see things obviously up front that a lot of the public doesn't get to see. But it's really important that because we know of all these issues, that we have a responsibility to address them in the best way that we can, in the most fiscally responsible way that we can. And I believe that this is the most fiscally responsible thing. These are not just random things that we just want to do for the city. These are things we know we have to do for the city. And we, right now, just looking at our budget, looking at the things we need to spend money on, we don't have the revenue right now. And it's just, like I said, it's just not going to get cheaper. So from my mind, this is not just, something that we just want to do. This is something that we have to do. And honestly, we should have done it a long time ago. So those are just my thoughts.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Gunn?
A couple of points, I guess. First, I don't think there's anybody here that doesn't think I believe we should just bundle it together. I believe it should be split to allow the people the decision. They probably would both still be possibly approved. But I think you're telling people that, hey, I got to support the library because I want the capital improvements, or I got to support the capital improvements because I want the library. So I think that's one point. But the second thing is, we keep saying we don't have enough. I mean, here we are, and we don't have enough revenue, right? We deferred all this maintenance. Really, if you looked at this, and I have to look at it from business because that's the way my mind works, I don't have enough revenue to cover all these expenses going forward. Shouldn't there be also a real effort to generate more income in this city? A way to do that? Because we could be talking about this in 10 years again. We don't have enough revenue to cover these expenses because we keep deferring it. So that's number one. That's the real issue. And I also think, and I don't think anybody was on city council then, but we have turned away some very major projects in the city. IKEA was a big proposal, and guess what we now, right? Were you on then?
No, they walked from here because the site that they were looking at they decided it wasn't going to work for them. There's this misinformation and folklore that they were turned away. And you know what? Where they wanted to do it, there would not have been the parking. And they saw that, they knew that, and they picked a different
Well, that's
site.
good to know, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But I would like to see some sort of attraction here, a big attraction, that these other cities are bringing in, and I think Troy's a perfect spot for it. But we gotta really look at increasing revenue somehow, because we're gonna be talking about this in 10 years again.
I've got to follow up with you on that, Marcus. What does that mean? You know, we did our budget the other night. More than half of our income is property taxes.
Right, exactly.
There's user fees that are very specifically used for certain things, the community center, for certain, certain funds. How does a city make money? I guess that's my question for you. What are we selling?
I would need to think on this and maybe talk with other people. I think that we have an economic development. I don't know what ideas they've come up with. But if we can't generate more, and we're still we're deferring in 10 years, we got too many expense. I am not trying to say, hey, we need to cut. I'm not trying to be the Dodge guy here, okay? But if we don't have enough revenue and we got these expenses and we're deferring maintenance, maybe we got too many buildings, maybe we got too many parks. And I'm not asking for us to cut anything, but how do we address that long term? Either not enough revenue or too much expenses.
We've had the lowest millage rate in Oakland County for cities, besides Orchard Lake, which is super rich people, for a generation. And over time, then the Great Recession hit us hard. And we used to have a 50-50 split of business property tax and residential property tax. Then in 2010, 2011, the state legislature decided to give huge relief to business tax. And now it's 66-34. And and that business piece that was so huge to us, we can't do what we used to do 20 years ago. You look at what our inflation adjusted revenue was 20 years ago, it was like 25% higher than what it is now. And
So
we've
the other
just done that
cities?
and other cities have raised their millage rates. Substantially. Sterling Heights is 60% higher. Rochester Hills, if you include refuse, is like 20% higher. Royal Oak is like crazy. They're super high.
What's our millage for the city? It's less than 9.8, I think, right? So
I'm all for it, Mark. Here's the thing. We try to raise admission to the aquatic center by $1 and people are going to go crazy, right? I mean, because that's user fees are our primary source. And getting a big attraction when we don't have a lot of land left to develop, there's not a big opportunity to bring in $1 billion project that's going to generate so much money.
What's the property up on Crooks Road in 75 where that used to be that?
The old Met property, right?
Yeah.
That's the potential, and the owner doesn't seem to be moving very fast on it. But it's still not, as we talked about the other night, one project's not going to make.
No, I know, and I'm just looking for.
in two ways you can generate revenue. One is increasing the millage or have a large scale development, like a lot of buildings. We don't really have that room for that. And in general, residents don't like multi-story buildings, right? That's another way to do. So that
Not
is,
a windfall. We
and that's
learned
not a
that
windfall
last
either.
night.
I mean,
Not a
whatever
windfall.
left spaces left, we can only do maybe 10% more, even not even that. I mean, the Kmart property is going to be one of the larger ones, but even then, the additional revenue is not going to be too much. So.
Then I'd rather ask the residents to support a bond, and that way then ask them to sell off the parkland. Because we generate money by selling off our parks. And I don't want to do that.
No,
I don't think you do either. But that's our only land left. That's our biggest asset that's marketable would probably be our parkland.
Right.
Does anybody here want to sell it so it can be developed? I don't think so.
I think that's the number one thing we hear is green space.
I just feel like, and I know I didn't need to clap back a little bit, but to ask a question like that is dangerous because it makes it seem like, well, we're not exploring other options. Well, okay, Mark, what are the other opportunities? And I know we hear from a lot of different people who want us to ask certain questions, and I get it, I'm there, but I don't want it to be out there that, oh, Mark asked this question and we all laughed at it. It's not that. It's just that there are limited ways for a city of our size, built out like we are, to increase our revenue other than asking the taxpayers to support a temporary bond.
Especially with Headley and Prop A as well.
One idea I threw out there, I did do research and found 4 other cities on the East Coast that are the same size as Troy, give or plus 2,000 or 3,000 residents, that did public-private participation in municipal buildings. And now, do I have that person in mind or entity or whatever? No. But I mean, that's an option. you go into partnership and you cut the costs on the development.
A lot of those East Coast states are.
We tried. That was the controversy of the Civic Center development, is it would have meant selling it, And people were clear, we don't want that.
We tried, and we lost, part of the reason everybody should be ticked off is that we lost years in, Rebecca became very involved. There almost was a charter change regarding our Civic Center that got voted in, which would have just tied the hands of every council and city administration about our Civic Center property going forward. There was a huge pushback on that private-public
Oh, I remember
type of...
17.
You were running, Mark. You supported that. I remember.
You know what? Fair enough. We talk about that, like Carmel, Indiana, I think was that we looked at, we have staff members that did, field trips around the country looking. You're absolutely spot on asking these questions. You're not asking unfair questions. But we really worked, and we had a plan. Now, the truth is, the plan that was developed then, it sits on a shelf, and we can look at it, and it is almost like a vision board of our Civic Center property, because we did get resident feedback on that, so we know what people liked about that. So we're not talking about things in a vacuum. We've been engaging for years. We know what people want. It's the how of getting there. Right. And the cities around us, so we tried that, been there, done that. It was a big fat fail. I mean, it was ugly, and we lost time. And Rebecca, you had a front row seat for that too, Ethan.
A bipartisan initiative of people coming together.
It just, So, in the meantime, what's been going on in the cities around us, and I'm glad. I mean, I want our neighboring cities to be strong and thriving too. They're passing a millage for their old people center. They're passing millages for parks. They're passing millages for libraries, building new libraries. We've been chugging along and MacGyvering really quite amazingly and effectively a budget with an operating millage cap, city charter. Like if we wanted to go out and ask for $0.25 or $0.5, it has to go to a vote of the people because our charter was changed in the mid-2000s. And I think when we're talking about a bond, first of all, a bond, correct me if I'm wrong, we can get a millage, you have to accrue the money over time.
Sure.
Over years. We're losing years. We don't have time to be accruing, in my mind. Please disagree with me, fellow colleagues or staff. A bond gets us our money, kind of like taking a home equity loan out when, your 1970s house, my 1980s house, we needed a roof, we needed windows, we needed a new kitchen. We needed to send somebody to college. We had home equity loan type things. This is our opportunity. We have a good savings account that's fiscally responsible. We are pretty much debt-free. You could argue that a bond is a really fiscally wise choice for our home. That is Troy. And we're not going, honestly, I could argue that we should be doing a little bit more. I get it. I'm willing to compromise, and but there aren't these. If it was easy to come up with it in other ways, I am telling you, it would have happened a number of years ago. And the grant money that we've been clawing back from the state and the federal government, well, that was a nice little window of time that we kind of enjoyed to bring something like a cricket pitch that will bring money in. Right.
That's a big part right there. We don't get enough back from the state.
Well, and I think those days are done. So we're going to have to really pull ourselves up by our bootstraps to take care of our home. That's, again, I don't pretend to be an expert. This is me just paying attention for years. Correct me if I'm wrong. Argue with me.
Well said. Well said.
I look at it in a big picture way, in a layman's way. And Mark, if I thought we could, let's tap the brakes and take some time and we'll explore some creative options.
Sure.
I've done that already. And we're at that inflection point. This is what we need to do. And I think we need to be honest with our fellow residents. Look, they might not like to hear it, but the best thing we can do is be straight and honest. We need to do this. This is good for your home investment. This is good. There might be people who say, I'm done. I voted for a school bond. I voted for the DIA. I voted for the Oakland County Parks. I'm done. I realize that could happen. But if people want us to be delivering what we get pressured to deliver, we need this. And if they don't vote for it, then we are able to say, we can't do what you're asking for us. We can give you a vital city in other ways, but that's our reality. And I think ethically, we have a responsibility to be honest with our fellow residents. I have the political side of me that's completely wigged. This isn't how I want to spend my summer, dealing with people not happy about such a request. But it's like ethically, morally, fiduciarily, however you say that word, where we're at. And so I don't want you to think I'm discounting you.
No, well, I mean, I guess when we had that presentation the first time and we showed bonds that had been approved. And Sterling Heights and Rochester had to be in that area because we talked about bonds that were approved and not approved. School bonds, 100 millions, plenty. The largest city bond approved was 18 million in the last 6 years based on that presentation. That's when I got scared, like, holy crap, who's going to approve a at that time, $125 million bond? Because they do their homework, and I mean, so maybe Sterling Heights and Rochester did have a bond approved.
They have millages.
It doesn't act, it just.
Yeah. And you know, Livonia's doing a $150 million bond in August, and Novi's doing a $120 million bond in August.
Oh, really?
And so, I mean, because those are more, for whatever reason, those presentations of cities that were presented to us, those weren't comparable cities.
Right.
I mean, I consider Novi and Livonia more in line with what we are, size and scope. So I think there is, I mean, and those could fail in Novi and Livonia, and one in Troy could fail in November. And that's part of the game. That's the way it works. You know, we have to look at that. But again, I just want to add one other thing about the public-private partnership aspect of it. You know, the 2017 and the Civic Center, all that. I've done a few conferences this year or over the past year about those with different groups throughout the country. And the first thing they always say to a city, to a mayor when I'm there is, if you have a project that you can't afford, a P3 is not going to make it affordable suddenly. It's because they don't just give you free money and make it. I mean, it doesn't work like that. And so that's really resonated with me. I think, you know, a library is a little different than maybe I hate to say it, like a convention center or something that can generate money. That makes more sense to maybe partner with somebody out private sector because you can use public and private resources. But libraries are not private sector. There's not private libraries. Well, maybe there is, but you know, there's not. I mean, and it's not something we can charge admission for. If you can't charge admission to a library, then some private business owner is not going to invest money because there's no return, right? I know it sucks. I mean, I get it. And there's people in our city who will vote no every time they're given the opportunity to have their taxes raised, and I get it. I don't want to raise any. I don't even want to spend $200, $300 more a year right now if I don't have to. But I know our city needs it.
Right.
I do know that. 10 years in, I know it, and you know it too. Yeah. I know you do, but I know we were polled by different people. I get it. That I really get. So
And it's been 26 years since the city of Troy has asked for a bond, or asked for
non-library
bond. Yeah, they asked for a Headley rollback in 2009 that failed, but other than for the general
bond,
not a bond, but for a bond, it's been 26 years since the city's even been asked for, and since they've approved a non-library millage increase of some sort. It's 26 years. It's only been the library that's gotten
last century.
Yeah, I was in high school at Troy High in 1999.
Here I came in.
So, yeah, I want to give the residents a chance to make that decision. It's their decision. It's not our decision.
Right.
We're already paring down what we know our needs and wants are. I want to give them a chance to do this. I know there's a lot of economic uncertainty. I trust Troy residents to take the info and make the best decision for the city and where they want it to go.
Did you have something, Councilmember?
I wanted to share comments. I think we're at a comment
Yeah, we're
stage.
commenting, clearly.
We're at a comment stage. So, and I wanted to share because I had had my aha moment. So, and I'm in a different place, and I don't know if this helps you, Mark, because our conversation Monday, you know, I was in a more fiscally conservative place, and I was starting to write out some notes, and I had my own aha moment. It comes at different points for different people. But I think one of those is looking at those different numbers, and we talked about, I know there was a question of, well, what about, you know, all these new development? Isn't that enough to generate the money? Well, what we saw in the budget meeting on Monday, it's just 7 million. 7 million maybe gets you 4 miles of road. I mean, it doesn't, well, that's 4 million is about 2 miles, but you know, so maybe like 2 full miles, like that's all you're gonna get. It's not gonna actually meet the needs of the city. And then looking at the general fund, the unassigned fund balance, if someone would think, okay, your savings account, can't you tap into that money? Well, much of it is tied up. You can't touch it because and then the only amount that's actually left that you could potentially touch is 23 million. And we have a policy that actually you have to keep a certain amount in. But even if we did take that 23 million, again, we're saying we've pared things down to we need about 112 million. 23 million doesn't get you anywhere. It doesn't get you to where you need. And then I think the most compelling number, because I had to go through these numbers and kind of connect the dots, is where the capital fund balance is. So after this budget, if it passes, you know, our budget for 2026, in that savings account for capital, it's only 1.7 million. And I suddenly realized, and we talked about that, how that we don't want it to go lower than that. And that's why I realized, you know, so what we've been doing over the years is we take money from the general fund, put it into that, but then suddenly, you know, in folks, you know, who've been studying this, most of the general fund goes to public safety. Well, if a bond doesn't pass, or we don't even try a bond, and we're only at 1.7 in your savings account for all your capital projects, you have to tap into the general fund, and that could hurt public safety. And so that's when I suddenly realized, if we don't do this, we could hurt public safety. We could hurt the things that it's no longer tenable, as Councilmember Brooks said. We cannot do this any longer. And so as much as there's a fiduciary side of me, there's a representative side of me, and as a rep, like I feel like I just still want to talk to more people, but as a fiduciary, I realized, you know, there's only 1.7 million left in the savings account for capital, like we have to do this. We have to do it. So I get that, and I'm in that place, and this is a thing that will support the safety of our community. To me, it is also about public safety, and it's about self-reliance. So I'm supportive. I do like the idea of keeping it to 112 million, definitely keeping it under 1 mil in this economic climate, but I have come around, and I've had my aha moment to know that this is very important.
Thank you. Councilor Chanda?
Yeah, it's comment section now, so I kind of agree with I have been struggling also with, you know, especially given the economy, good uncertainty in the economy. It is important that we do at least go with what is proposed. It's primarily because what Councilor Chamberlain mentioned, we have less than $2 million left in our capital budget, and same day we found out just to fix the police roof we need about $2 million, right? So we do need, I mean, that is going to affect things that we not only need in long run, but maybe need next month. I mean, it is something, a city of our size, we cannot afford to have just $2 million left. Library is one of the things that we've been talking about for a long time. I mean, residents are looking at it. The 4 things we picked are the top 4 priorities that our residents have told us: roads, parks, library, and public safety. So I do feel comfortable with this amount. I'm glad that you brought it up, the private-public, you know, the partnership. It's important. We looked at it. It's good that, you know, Councilmember Hoderick, you kind of mentioned, for those of us who were not here many years ago. I vaguely remember, I didn't really follow that very well, but that we have looked at that. It is something that we looked at. It's not feasible. It's not something our residents would want. Nobody would want us to sell off our parklands to build a huge, you know, development. I mean, that is the number one thing besides public safety, I think we hear, is preservation of green space. And it makes sense. Me as a homeowner, I really don't want to have our green spaces gone. So we give our residents a chance as, it is at the end of the day, our voters will have to look at it. So I feel comfortable supporting this amount. I don't feel comfortable going above 1. I think that is something we'd like to keep it beyond that. If we have to cut 1 or 2 items from here, that's fine, but let's keep it below 1, whatever that number is. So that's what I am. I think we need to make a decision. We still have time, month and a half, but I believe feel comfortable supporting this particular number. So.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yeah, just briefly, I know in 2 weeks we have the library joint meeting with planning, but we're not getting numbers till May. In that meeting, are we going to get any sense of the numbers that are coming on what the library will cost, or is it more just design that we'll be talking about in 2 months, or 2 weeks? Sorry.
There'll be a cost estimate too.
Okay, that'll be a little more refined than
Yes.
what we've done. Okay.
It won't be the full cost estimate, right, Frank? I mean, that says the cost estimate comes May 30th. Is it a preliminary cost estimate on the 28th? I don't want to.
I'll put it, Emily, I want to make sure you get the correct
We're focused on
information.
design, so, yeah, that's the design of the site plan. They might give you an idea of the size, but they won't have the cost estimate yet.
Okay.
Additional comments? I mean, Councilmember Hildreth.
This is actually a question. I know because we're familiar with City Hall and what it needs, the one thing I do get feedback on is I engage with people who just don't understand that City Hall has needs. I don't know that we want to be listing that as part of the bond.
No, we wouldn't. It was through feedback from residents and all the discussions. That's why it's not there. We have the 4 major areas: library, roads, public safety, and recreation. So that was removed.
Okay, just want to confirm.
And City Hall will compete with other things within the capital budget every year, so.
I'm personally disappointed in that from an attraction and retention of employees standpoint. I've worked in the City Hall. There was a period of time last spring when we had employees that weren't here because it was 120 degrees in here and the air wasn't working, and it's just kind of a constant. It wasn't wrong that we were talking about that, but I don't think bringing our residents along with that. So to employees, I say that regrettably, but I think we can hopefully manage our way through that. The work environment, we are competing for employees with the private sector and with other municipal entities. And so, the place they work and where you're served as a resident matters. But I'm glad, I think it's right that that's pulled out.
I'm in the same place. I already kind of said my piece, so.
So there's consensus to move forward as is, even with some questions and some concerns about other things. We're not voting on language tonight. We're not voting on specific, really, we're not voting at all. But I think you have direction from us. I guess I said some comments earlier, but I just want to add, there's a piece of everything, or something from everyone today that I completely resonate with. And the hardest thing I think from my position, from all of our positions, is that we represent 87,000 different people, and we don't talk to all of them, although some days it feels like it, which I love. But like I said, there's going to be people who will say, absolutely no way, I'm not voting for this. You couldn't, I can afford it, but I don't want to do it. Or I can't afford it, and that's why. I mean, there's going to be reasons that are always the way. And there are, and that's, I get that, I understand it. There's going to be people who are going to begrudgingly vote for it, and there's going to be people who excitedly vote for it, because they're all going to come from it with a different place. I think it's important for all of us to continue to talk about facts in a responsible way, recognizing that facts, I'm going to sound crazy, facts don't always people don't always respond to facts the same way. They can take them through different filters and hear them different ways. And so we have to be very careful in what we say. And sometimes I know I do it. I talk fast. I throw things out. I sound like I'm a know-it-all, or I sound like I'm talking about things that, and I shouldn't be. And I just, that's I guess a caution for all of us. And I know when Courtney comes back, she'll be very solid on communicating, the neutral facts from the city's perspective. But I hope we all can continue to recognize that we're going to hear from a lot of different people the minute this meeting adjourns, probably. And there'll be comments on Nextdoor, and there'll be comments on Facebook, and there'll be comments in our email inboxes and on our phone voicemails that are going to be supportive and also going to be angry. That's just the reality of it. And I hate to go kind of some of that negativity. It's the reality of this. But at the end of the day, we've all talked about it. And Mark, I know, and I'm only singling you out because you were you're on the least supportive probably night to give consensus. I know and in a perfect world, I think you would love to have all of this stuff.
Sure.
And I know how much you love the city and you love the library and you want everything to be great. You're just always asking more questions to try to find if there's another or better way to do it. And I respect that. I know we all do. But we live in a city now that is aging, and they talk about the capital fund balance and the reduction of the capital millage every year in a budget because of Headley, and we make sure we keep our operating millage and solid at as high as it can go, so we make sure we have the police officers we need and all the public safety, but that has chipped away at our capital year after year. And to me, this is the best use of our city's money to ask our residents if they will support this debt millage. It's not in perpetuity. It's not just a general tax increase. I wouldn't support that. I don't think that's palatable in our community right now, but I think our community would be willing to consider borrowing money and having the services that they are constantly peppering us with what they want. And it's not just the library. It's not just pickleball. It's our roads. It's our public safety. It's across the whole city. And this, to me, is the only way, our best chance of succeeding in providing the services and the facilities that our residents are asking for us, and frankly are questioning why they don't already have. And again, if it doesn't pass, then the next day, November 5th, the city management goes back to trying to figure out what we can do to keep working on these projects. But I'm really comfortable supporting this. Strangely enough, many of you know my political background. I wish we were asking for more because I think there are more needs, and I'm afraid there's not going to be enough to actually do what we need to do, but I also recognize that this could be a stretch for some people, and I think consensus of council is to keep it at this lower amount.
One final comment or thought is, okay, so we get the money, right? That money's got to be paid back through a budget that we don't have enough money to do everything anyways already. So what does that look like?
That's what the millage increase will cover.
Yeah. Okay, so the millage will do.
That's all. The millage increase is the debt millage to only support and pay for the bond payments, right?
That's correct.
Right.
Okay.
So it'll be self-sufficient in that respect if the residents support.
I mean, it won't
doesn't
water
affect
down and then not.
No. That's why it feels like the most fiscally responsible, clear, honest approach to do what we need to do. And as a taxpayer, I'm not going to be on council anymore, and I don't want you people doing doofy things with my tax dollars. I know what it's going to. So that's why I'm tracking with the idea of a bond versus another reason versus a millage.
Well, I'm sorry. Well, the point was, first, I'm not against these things that we need. I guess in a library, I would look and want and try to explore as many options as we have versus just, and as far as the capital improvements or, that we need, of course I'm for that. The reason that I have been so pushing the split them is because in my observation in their history, we've passed millages or bonds that have been split, not just altogether. And I'm afraid one could fail because someone didn't want the other one or vice versa. And then we're, like you said, November 5th, we're at the drawing board again.
Well, let's use the next couple months of engagement to kind of see where the community's at and where they want to go with that.
I agree, I'm all for, I want to state out here though, I'm not supportive of splitting them, because I think that sends the message that either public safety or the library is important, you gotta pick a side, because at the end of the day, and I'll be really honest, for somebody, and I don't want to upset library folks that are watching, I don't want to upset anybody else, but if I'm feeling an economic pinch and my bank account is dropped on November 4th when I'm voting, because I vote in person on election day, but if I'm doing that and I'm feeling really scared, I'm gonna vote for public safety and roads, and I might not support the library at that point. And I don't wanna, and I know our library is important to our community. And so I really worry about saying that these are, one's more important than the other. I think all are equally important. Yeah. So, we do community engagement. We've been doing it for years. And I just don't, I think it's potentially creating some confusion and a bad situation for our city if we're splitting them up like that. And I'm 7:37. There's no end sign to this meeting. We can continue to talk about this a little bit, but I don't know I just don't know if that's healthy for our community to do it that way. And I don't know if I'm fully stating it the way I'm meaning it at this point, but that concerns me more than not, because I know a lot of people will politicize certain aspects of these things, and I'm afraid of that.
No, I agree. I mean, I don't agree with splitting it up either personally, but I think we've already done some, at least preliminarily, community engagement, and I mean, we've already scaled back, based off of the feedback. So, we started out with a much larger scope, and we've already scaled back. So, I think that we are responding already to what residents are telling us. So, I think that these are things that residents are saying is important to them, so.
In the original list was had things that we need and then nice to have, and we are literally going for things that we need. So bringing it down to this number is, in my mind, based on what the community is asking for. I thought long and hard about splitting it also, because giving people a chance, but at the end of the day, my conclusion is the same way Mayor was thinking. It's not one versus other, both are equally important in my mind. And you can't say, the library is more important than public safety or vice versa. I mean, obviously, public safety is our #1 priority, but so is the library. I mean, we can't have a modern city without a functioning and modern library. So I myself really thought about it. It's not that it's a slam dunk that we want to put everything together, but I personally feel also the same way. Let's put this together, keep it below 1 mil or around 1 mil, and I think that's, understand that that's not probably enough in the long run, but that is enough to, I think rest of it we'll be able to manage. But without this, we really can't manage. We really will be looking at living in a city that I don't feel proud to live in. So I think this is bare minimum, and as Councilmember Hamilton said, it's a choice for the Mayor. You said it's a choice for the voters. I mean, some people may not like anything. Some people would love it, and then we will try our best to educate the public what's at stake, what you get or don't get. I mean, I think most people look, if this fails, what happens? Right? And that's something up to us to educate them as much as possible, but I feel comfortable putting that on the ballot. So
in my mind, this is all about communication, and whether it is separate or together, there will need a message of how these things hold together. So then why not put it together and have that common message that is able to communicate how these things are all feeding into each other, because they do. And so that's how I've landed, because I know I also was entertaining, why not separate them? Sure. But I've landed, at the end of the day, there needs to be a common message of them holding together. And so I believe that. Other thing I wanted, you raised a point about it won't be watered down, and I did want to clarify, that's the thing about a debt millage, it can't be rolled back by Headley. So that is the good thing about a debt millage.
That's a really good point.
versus operating, so.
And you can refinance them if the interest rates drop, and then that will drop the amount we have to pay.
We did that a few years ago.
We did that a few
Which
years
we've
ago.
done.
Yep.
Yeah. We meaning people who are way smarter than.
And enabled us, all that money allowed us to do the Big Beaver development with the DDA
funds,
due to
sure.
that, those DDA funds
The
being
AAA bond
refinanced.
rating, that's another thing going in our favor, that hopefully, yeah.
Which Sterling Heights is jealous of, by the
As
way.
they should be, for once. They're jealous of a lot of things of us in Sterling Heights, believe it or not. I know we talked about that a lot, but yeah.
I know a couple people were talking about the splitting, and I've met with residents, some who felt strongly about it in both ways, so I've spent a lot of time contemplating too. Splitting it will communicate in and of itself, suggests that you can just vote for one and that's going to be good for the city. And that's factually inaccurate. It needs to be, like you said, it is integrated. And then it's integrated beyond that with our operating budget. So I really, truly entertained that, and it just felt like I'm signaling something that is absolutely false by splitting it, that it's okay to split this out. I'm weirdly where you are, and I'm actually pretty fiscally conservative, and I'm married to a very, very conservative guy. I worry that we're not asking for enough. And it may be some years down the road in a different time that, you know, a second bond to do X or Y or something will come in. Given the uncertainty of the times that we're in, I think we're doing the responsible thing. But I just wanted you to know, I'm not discounting entertaining that, and I've spent a lot of time contemplating it. It's the wrong message. We're not being factual. And at the end of the day, the conversation about this, you know, out on Nextdoor, Facebook, Twitter, whatnot, the misinformation I'm already seeing about assumptions about things, and you know, the library building was an issue and now they're tacking on all this other stuff. I'm here to tell you, this other stuff was what was keeping us up at night, and the library came in. And you know what? It's all critical, all of it. So being as clear as possible in times when everything can divide us, I would hate to see, if we split it apart, things pitted against one another and residents pitted, because it's all equally critical. So, Mark,
Well, my perception is this election season is, and I think we heard the numbers, it's like, we're going to, what, maybe 20% of the people are going to vote? And they're usually seniors. And are they the ones that could say, you know what? Or like you, not saying you're a senior, elder, but.
I am seeing.
But I mean, it could be on the, could be in a worse situation on a fixed income and I can't afford it,
Get out the vote.
Right? Well,
We're going to need to communicate. And I would argue, as a senior, these are critical to make sure the community we're living in and aging in place in is safe, vital, vibrant, is the Troy that you want to age in. Walk your neighborhood in, go to the parks in. And it's seniors that have been beating us up the most about things. And that's where we're trying to give some relief to the operating to deliver. So I get it, I hear your concern. We just have to we have to do the best we can to convey to our fellow residents, who many of them will be frustrated with us. There's also a pile of people that are going to be absolutely turned on that we're finally doing this. Excited about the reinvestment. There's that too. I'm running into all of it. Am I crystal balling the results?
you send some my way, because I'm not.
We'll try, Mark.
That's all my neighbors.
Yeah. Any last comments? I just want to, I guess I want to thank James first who successfully didn't have to speak again after his introduction. Good job, James. That's a sign of a good presentation for you. And I appreciate you coming and putting this back together. I know obviously you work with staff to get everything caught in, so I appreciate all that. And Frank, I always, to everybody sitting here and the team that you're trying to keep a hold of while we go through all these meetings and figure everything out, I appreciate that they have been putting in so much work on these projects and trying to get the information you need to present to us. And I guess my last question for you is there anything else you needed from us tonight before we adjourn that would make it clearer or better, or can you go to work tomorrow morning and know where we are?
Yeah, no, I'll say a few things, just for a clarification point with Councilmember Hamilton, and thank you, James, for having that up. Yes, April 28th is at Ground Floor Concepts, the joint meeting, and then May 30th is the schematic design and cost estimate.
So is that a council meeting, the 30th, or?
No, that's the due date.
Oh, the due,
presented at the June 9th meeting.
Okay, got it.
Okay. We have a lot of great things been going on. Staff and myself have been very busy ensuring that we're getting everything the residents want done and you good folks want done. I think I heard there's a consensus here, 1 mil or less for those 4 major projects: library, roads, public safety, and recreation. And we'll be able to do that community engagement, educational, getting more information out, using Courtney's staff, and hopefully Courtney back soon. And we can charge ahead because it is a quick timeline. So I also want to thank James, appreciate it, you did a wonderful job. Staff, always appreciate you guys spending the evening with me and answering the questions. Answered a lot of great questions, so there's great conversations. If you guys tonight, tomorrow, the next few days come up with some more questions about everything, because there was a lot of information here, reach out to me and my staff, we'll get those to you. Great comments by council, questions, everything you guys do, really appreciate it. And that's it. I'm wrapping it up on my end, but thanks again, appreciate it.
Okay, this presentation will be on the website for these slides. We can do that for people who want to see it. And okay, we have no other business stated in the agenda, so we are adjourned.